Okay, so let's jump right in. You've probably heard the term filial piety or xiao in Chinese, and you might think it's just about, being nice to your parents, but it is so much more than that. We're talking about one of the most powerful and long-lasting ideas in Chinese civilization, a concept that has literally shaped society, politics, and the very definition of being human for thousands of years.
And to really get a sense of how big of a deal this is, just listen to this quote from historian Donald Holzman. He says filial piety had an absolute value, something he compares to the worship of God in the West. Now, that is a huge statement. We're not just talking about a social rule here. We're talking about a sacred, almost holy duty. So that's the big mystery, right? How on earth did this one virtue, centered on the family, become so powerful that you could even put it in the same sentence as worshiping God? Well, to figure that out, we need to go way, way back.
To answer our question, we have to start at the very beginning. I mean, ancient China, long before famous guys like Confucius were even on the scene. Because the seeds of filial piety, they weren't first planted in philosophy books. Nope. They were planted in the much, much older soil of prehistoric religion. This timeline really shows you just how deep these roots go. I mean, look all the way back to 3000 BC. We have archaeological evidence that ancestor worship was already a thing. Then, fast forward to the Shang dynasty around 1250 BC, and it's become a central part of how the state works. The king couldn't just pray to the main god, Shangdi. No, he had to go through his ancestors, who acted like divine middlemen. So it's only after thousands of years of this practice that the actual character for Xiao finally shows up.
And the character itself tells you everything you need to know. It's basically a picture, an ideogram. It shows the character for old stacked right on top of the character for child. A child literally holding up the elder. It's all right there in this visual DNA, support, respect, and the endless chain of the family line.
So the basic feeling was already there, deep in the culture. But it was Confucius and his followers who came along and turned this raw religious impulse into an incredibly sophisticated social code, a whole system designed to guide pretty much every move you make in your daily life. And this is where it gets really methodical. Now, this diagram might look a little complicated, but the idea behind it is actually pretty simple and incredibly powerful. Confucian ethics isn't just a list of thou shalt and thou shalt nots. It's more like a psychological flowchart. It's a map for how you should act in literally any social situation. And it all starts from one place, figuring out your relationship to the other person. It's basically a three-step mental process. First, you judge the guanxi, the relationship. Is this person family, a friend, a total stranger? Based on that answer, you pick the right rule. For your closest family, it's the need rule. You give them what they need, no questions asked. For strangers, it's the equity rule, a fair, balanced trade. And for everyone in between, it's the wrenching rule, which is all about maintaining good relationships and trading favors. Only then, once you've figured all that out, do you act with li, or propriety, to make sure it's all done politely. So, what's the fuel for this whole engine? Well, it's a concept called ren, or benevolence. And it's just this simple, intuitive idea that, of course, you care more for the people you're closest to. Ren is the why. It's the feeling that makes it seem natural and right to treat your family differently from everyone else. And if Ren is the emotional why, then Yi, or righteousness, is the moral how. Yi is the logic that says it's not just natural, it's morally correct to treat people differently based on who they are to you. So respecting your boss or an elder isn't just being polite, it's seen as a fundamentally righteous act. Together, these two ideas create this incredibly flexible system for getting along in the world. And believe me, this wasn't just some abstract social theory. No, it gets way more personal and physical than that. Listen to this quote from the classic of filial piety. Our body, with hair and skin, is derived from our parents. The idea is that your life, your actual physical body, isn't even really yours. It's a gift, an extension of your parents. So your first and most basic duty to them is to simply take care of yourself. That's the starting point. Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting. To understand just how uniquely powerful filial piety is, you have to see what happens when it goes head-to-head with the other great Confucian virtue, loyalty to your ruler. You think they'd be similar, but they operate on completely different logic. This brings up a huge ethical question, right? What do you do when an authority figure, your father or your emperor, is just plain wrong, when they're being immoral? Well, the Confucian answer to this tells you everything you need to know about which virtue comes out on top. And this comparison just lays it all out crystal clear. Look at this. Loyalty to a ruler, totally conditional. It's based on whether they're being a good moral leader. If the ruler becomes a tyrant, a minister is totally justified in quitting
or even helping to get rid of them. But filial piety? It is unconditional. That blood tie to your parent can never be broken. You can, and you actually should, gently tell them when they're wrong, but you can never ever abandon them. That bond is unbreakable. And the philosopher Mencius? Oh, he does not pull any punches on this. It's honestly kind of brutal. When somebody asked him about a minister who killed his king, Mencius basically said, a ruler who acts like that isn't a ruler anymore. He's just a robber, a common criminal. So, in his eyes, a sovereign wasn't even killed, just some peasant. A ruler can lose their right to rule. A parent never, ever can. Their authority is absolute. Okay, so that's the traditional ideal, the hardcore version. But how does a virtue this ancient possibly hold up in our modern world of, globalization and individualism? Well, the answer that the data shows us is probably not what you'd expect. Modern studies, like this one out of Taiwan, show this really fascinating evolution. If you look at the chart, you can see two types of filial piety. The first bar, representing passive piety, that's the whole unquestioning obedience thing, is way lower. But the second bar, for active piety, which is all about emotional support and taking care of your parents, that remains incredibly strong. You could even argue it's more important than ever. So the big takeaway here is that modernization didn't kill filial piety at all. It just changed it. That rigid, authoritarian outer shell has kind of fallen away, but the inner core, that deep emotional bond of caring for each other, that has absolutely survived. And the fact that it's endured for so long points to something much deeper. Filial piety isn't just a list of things you're supposed to do. It actually shapes the very idea of what a self even is. This picture of concentric circles explains it perfectly. In a lot of Western thought, the self is that little dot in the very center, this separate individual unit. But in a Confucian framework, the self is the entire diagram. Your identity is actually defined by all of those outer circles, your connection to your family, your community, and your specific place in that network. So this gives us two ideas of the self. You've got the small self, which is your own individual personality and desires, and then you have the great self, which is your social identity, you as a part of this larger family organism. And what filial piety is, really, is the lifelong practice of prioritizing that great self. Your purpose isn't just for you, it's to be a strong link in this chain that connects your ancestors to your future descendants. And that really leaves us with a final question to think about, and it's one that applies to all of us, no matter where we're from. As our world keeps getting more and more individualistic, how much of that deep-seated idea of a great self, an identity that's defined by our connections to others, still shapes who we are and who we're all becoming?